Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our event today. I hope you are all enjoying Cyber Scotland Week and that you're enjoying many events along the week. So today we're going to focus on cyber clusters and really try and look into what is a cyber cluster, what are the benefits, and how can you get engaged and how can you benefit from them. So joining us today, we have Phil Jackman, who's the North East England Cluster Manager, and this is actually a joint event with the North East England Cluster. And we've got Owen Byrne, who's the Cyber Ireland Cluster Manager. We have Richard York, who's the Director of CNAM, which is the Cheltenham Cyber Cluster. And I'm Ciara Mitchell. I'm the Cluster Manager for Scotland Cyber Cluster, and joining me is my colleague David Ferguson, who's the Cyber Development Lead for the Cyber Cluster as well. Now we were expecting to have someone from DCMS join us today, but they had to call out at quite short notice. So instead of me handing over to someone from DCMS, I'm going to hand over to myself to talk about the Scottish Cyber Cluster. So just let me quickly share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that now.
Yep.
Perfect, right, okay. So I'm just going to run through the Scottish Cyber Cluster for about 10 minutes. Then we'll have Phil Jackman's going to talk about his cluster. Owen's then going to cover the great things that's happening in Ireland. We'll have Richard York then say a few words as part of the introduction to the panel. And David Ferguson's going to facilitate the panel. So we've got a packed hour and a half for everybody. We will try and finish early if we can. Just I know people have had busy days with Cyber Scotland Week, but we do have a fairly packed agenda. So to touch quickly on Cyber Scotland Week, and so I'm just keep making sure I don't speak for half an hour. I'm just going to keep an eye on the time. So quickly about Cyber Scotland community in Scotland. I'm just going to touch on a couple of slides to talk you through it. So we do feel in Scotland that we do have a very engaged and supportive community here, and we believe that is due to that close working relationship across government, academia, enterprise, and census, and the start of an intramural community. That logo in the top right hand corner, Cyber Scotland Partnership, that was actually just announced today. So that's going to be a partnership across Scottish Government, Scotland Is, who myself and David work for, the Scottish Business Resilience Centre, and a number of other organisations to make sure we are pulling together that collaboration and partnership for the benefit of Scotland as a whole. And through the cluster, we'll be bringing in that innovation into that. So we have currently in Scotland around about 230 cybersecurity companies that operate here. That's from startups, scale-ups, SMEs, right through your global multinationals who are starting to set up offices and build their teams here. We've also a number of large organisations who are running their SOCs and their operation teams from Scotland as well. So we are seeing that cyber community grow year on year. On the academic side, which I'll just come on to now, we have a number of accolades that we like to call out. So we have, I think we have something like 70% of our universities now offer cybersecurity across degree, masters, and PhDs. And we have the only fully certified NCSC degree course, which is offered from Abertay University. We have an NCSC Centre of Excellence at Edinburgh University. And we have a recently announced gold Centre of Education at Abertay University. So I know some of this terminology might not be familiar to you if you're connecting in from outside of the UK, but having the NCSC certification recognition really does help to put a stamp on the level of the research and the training and learning that's happening at our universities in Scotland. We feel we've got quite a good job market up here as well. So these were taken prior to COVID-19. So I couldn't say what the impact is to on the back of the last year that we've all had. But certainly prior to that, we did feel there was stats to back up the feeling that we had quite a strong and healthy job market here. And in fact, I think the salaries in Edinburgh are something like the third or fourth highest in the country, which is not great for employers, but great for employees. And hopefully it means we can attract and retain that talent at all levels as well. So within the cluster, we do a number of different things. Now, I'm not going to have time to go through all of these, and hopefully we'll touch on some of these as part of the panel at the end. But really what we do try and do is, build a community, facilitating networking, encourage the collaboration, and make sure that we're creating those strategic partnerships that can help support the cluster. And that's both in Scotland and across the UK and internationally as well. And of course, that's even more important than now, considering all the political upheaval that's going on, across between the UK and Europe and beyond. So yeah, making sure we're building those international collaborations are, is a key part of that. The cyber cluster is now a member of Global EPIC. As I know, Cyber Ireland is as well. So we've the Scottish cluster has only become a member of that end of last year. So we're really looking forward to using that to build those international relationships. We're also a silver badged cluster manager of excellence. So again, using that recognition that we'll get on the back of that to create that those relationships across Europe as well. So I'm just going to touch on one of those areas in particular, and that's that cross-sector collaboration. So this is something that we think is a real key area that we focus on. Now, this is mainly within Scotland, but obviously we'll expand that to outside Scotland as well. And really what we want to make sure we're doing is that we're working with all these sectors that are strong in Scotland, and we're making sure that security is part of that conversation, is considered from the start. So as Scotland starts to build this reputation, build this profile in a number of these areas, that is doing that with a very security first and secure by design approach. And some of these areas, I know people outside Scotland, they won't realise that we have growing sectors in these areas, like space tech, for example. There's some really exciting projects happening in space tech in Scotland, and that's right across this space ecosystem. I think with the exception of I haven't actually been able to fly people to space, I think we're covering pretty much every other sector of the space tech. So we're really keen to start working with the space tech community to make sure it's security first, it's secure by design, and that we're building our reputation on that. So we do see that as being a key part of the work we do. And again, for people who are outside of Scotland, I just wanted to quickly touch on ways that you can connect in with the ecosystem and you can be part of it. The fact you're part of this event means you're already connected to Cyber Scotland Week, which is great. This is the 3rd year we've been running it, and we'll continue to build and grow that each year. It's certainly becoming more of an international occasion this year, with it being online. So we will continue to make sure it's a mix of online and hopefully face-to-face next year and beyond. But there's a number of other key events and ways to connect into the cybersecurity community if that's what you'd like to do. Scotland Secure is a 2-day conference that's happening in March this year. The Cyber Awards unfortunately didn't happen in 2020, but they'll hopefully be back later this year or next year, and they're a great night to celebrate the Scottish cyber community. I think there was something like 600 people in the room when we last had it end of 2019, and that's run by the Scottish Business Resilience Centre. So it's a great night. We've plenty of meetups as well. So if you want the more informal gatherings, then Cyber Scotland Connect, Women in Cyber Security. And also last night I was at the launch event of the Ladies of Glasgow Hacking Society. So we now have a Ladies Hacking Society chapter in Scotland, which is great. So there's lots of different meetups and groups that people can get involved with if they want to just immerse themselves in this Scottish community. And then I'm not got too much more to say, but I just wanted to draw people's attention to 2 reports which may be of interest. So the one on the left was created by Scottish Development International. For those of you not familiar with that, they're similar to DIT. So they get involved with helping Scottish companies to trade internationally, and also to looking at the inward investment, looking at encouraging companies to set up offices and relocate to Scotland. So this collateral was created with the latter in mind, with that inward investment. But I'm more than happy to send the link to anyone who'd like to just see that pitch, to see, well, why would we consider Scotland as the right choice for cybersecurity? And there's many benefits. We have a very strong tech ecosystem as a whole, so we've got a lot of skill and experience in organizations starting up and scaling up companies that the cybersecurity can tap into for any companies developing cyber products and services in particular. And the one on the right was one we just released in January, and actually all of the clusters represented here, CNAM, North East England and Cyber Ireland, all contributed to it. So thank you all very much for your support in that. it's mainly looking at a snapshot view of the Scottish cyber cluster, but we did go out and speak to a number of UK and international clusters to get an understanding of how they operated, what their challenges were, and kind of what the plans were, so that we could kind of learn and gain insights from that as well. So both publicly available, so have a look, but if you can't find them, obviously feel free to get in touch. And that's really it for me. I do get in touch if there is anything else that you would like to know on anything I've said. You know, seeing myself and David has been a good way to connect into the Scottish Cyber Cluster, and we're more than happy to help you get involved and help get you engaged in the Cyber Cluster. So that's it from me. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to hand over to Phil Jackman, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Cara. I'm going to try and share my slides if that's okay. Hopefully that works. You can see that okay? I presume that. I'll take that as a yes then. Okay, right, great. Okay, so my name is Phil Jackman, and I'm sorry, but I need to put a disclaimer here. When I talk about Cyber North and the Northeast, I'm talking about the Northeast of England and not the Northeast of Scotland. So it's that kind of white bit on Cara's map between Edinburgh and the rest of the world. Quite a bit of white space there. So we have set up this cluster fairly recently, supported as part of Dynamo Northeast, which is an organisation that's working to grow the tech sector across the region, and supported by some money from Accenture, who were one of our initial supporters, as it were. So we have about 70 cybersecurity companies in the region. We account for about 2% of the UK's cybersecurity sector, compared to I think 9% in Scotland, so we're significantly smaller, and but significantly important in what we're trying to do. Let me just see if I can move on to the next slide. Slide 2. Yeah, so our role is to position the Northeast of England as a great place to deliver cybersecurity services, and I guess that'll be the same with every single cluster that we're going to hear from tonight. The job is to position their particular set of circumstances as a good place to deliver cybersecurity services on the back of. But why? Why do we want to do this? Well, I think there are 4 real reasons why clustering is relevant. The first is, I think, regional recognition. Setting up a cluster allows people in business and in business that are consumers or providers of services to realize that there's actually a lot more going on in the region than they thought. It gives the opportunity to collaborate regionally. It gives the opportunity to sort of big up the region and to think about delivering across that service. But there's also external recognition, and clustering allows the rest of the country to think about the region as a place to deliver cybersecurity services. So it's much better as a group to engage with central government, regional government, etc. If you come together as a group, it's much easier. Third thing is that the more I've got involved in, the more I realize that there are other people trying to do the same thing as you, and it's much easier to steal those ideas or share those ideas than to come up with your own. So already tonight I've learned some things from Cara and her role, and I'm involved with the other people in the discussion here about learning how to improve the lot of our cluster. And I think fourthly, there's an international element. It gives us an opportunity to present the region internationally and to grow business outside there. So our real driving force is to support the region's ambition to create more jobs in the cybersecurity sector, and that really to support the growth of the region tech sector, because it's a horizontal, cybersecurity is a horizontal that needs to meet all of the verticals that exist within the region's tech sector. So not only the tech sector, but also the region's industrial sector, and I'll come further on to those in a minute. But for example, the Northeast is very big in manufacturing. In fact, most of the time, it's the only region in England which is a net exporter of goods. It has a net balance of trade, and most other regions don't. And as I've said, we want to be part of that national cybersecurity strategy, so put the Northeast on the map, as it were, and build upon the strengths that we have as a region. So what are those strengths? Well, for the 5 universities that we have significant courses in cybersecurity. We have 2 centres of excellence in those universities. We're the only city outside of London in England which has 2 centres of academic excellence in the universities in Northumbria and Newcastle. We are very strong in offshore renewables, but renewables energy in general. We're very strong in advanced manufacturing, as I've said. We're very strong in the public sector. Most of the public sector sheds are located in Newcastle, so DWP, HMRC, so pensions and taxation, and the NHS BSA, Business Services Authority, exists within Newcastle. So we're very strong in that. We're also very strong in chemical process engineering down in Teesside, and logistics and distribution with a number of ports, airports, etc. And we're also very strong in healthcare. So none of these are, as a region, single us out as different from anybody else. It's a combination of those, I think, that make us unique amongst the other regions. So as I've said, clustering helps in a number of ways, but it's going to support the region's ambition to create jobs. Let's create jobs in the back of the cybersecurity sector. Supports that regional tech sector, but creates that voice for the local cyber sector to come and approach the national government, regional government, and seek support. It engenders a sense of belonging in the companies that we get involved with, and as I said, supports the growth of the region's industry. We're also playing a part, or trying to play a part, in the new national cybersecurity strategy, which is currently being worked upon, and build upon the strengths that we have as a region. So our objectives are, as I said, to promote the regional cybersecurity industry, to support the development of existing businesses, and we're doing this through a tool where we try and combine the strength and collaboration of existing businesses. The one I'm most excited about, though, is our plan to create an innovation centre, similar to Lorca in London, to create a new innovation and development centre in the region to support innovation in new product. And then the fourth thing that I think we've recently just taken on is coordinating skills development initiatives such as Cyber First and some work that DCMS are doing or asking us to do on their behalf. Wouldn't be Cyber North if I didn't put a plug in for September Cyberfest. So like Cyber Scotland Week, we have a whole month in September to try and highlight the work of the region in Cyberfest. So look out for that, please. And I think that is my last slide. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please get in touch with Phil Jackman. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Phil. Thank you, Phil. That's been great. If you can shop, oh, perfect. That's great. That's great. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, it's great to hear what other clusters are doing as well, because you say it just helps us know how to connect into and what areas in particular you specialize in, so we can tap into that. So that's been brilliant. Thank you. Owen, I am going to hand to you next, if that's okay. So
yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Ciara.
Right.
I'll just get up my slides there. Are you able to see that? Is it gone full screen?
It's not full screen yet, no.
It'll do. It'll have to do. Hi everyone, my name is Owen Byrne. I'm the Cluster Manager for Cyber Ireland. So we're the National Cybersecurity Cluster Organisation. We're based down the very south of the country, down here in this cluster of cybersecurity companies, which is really the hub or the centre of Ireland's national cybersecurity industry or cybersecurity sector. The cluster itself is actually based in a university here, Munster Technological University, and it's kind of an interesting way of how the cluster actually developed out of a partnership between industry and academia, and was also supported by national government then as well. I suppose our role really is to represent the cybersecurity cluster in Ireland, to provide that voice. We have a national scope, although we're based down the very south. Some people call us the Cork Cybersecurity Cluster, but I can assure you we're the Irish Cybersecurity Cluster. We cover the whole of the Republic of Ireland. And I suppose really our vision is international. It's to try to put Ireland on the map to be a leader in cybersecurity talent, innovation, and solutions. So we started up the cluster in May of 2019. We actually launched it, but the initiation of it goes back a couple of years before that to 2017. And really what it was that there was a number of companies in the region who all had identified a skills shortage in cybersecurity. So the university actually facilitated an industry forum with about 20 of those companies, both multinationals and indigenous SMEs as well. And I suppose a lot of those would be competing with each other internationally as vendors, but also competing locally then as well for talent. But I suppose the challenge was big enough that it got them all together in a room together. And when they were exploring, I suppose, what the different skills shortages and skills gaps are, they also then started to look at, well, why is there such a low level of engagement between industry and academia with regards to research and innovation in Ireland as well? Why is there no national cybersecurity research centre or an innovation centre, Phil, like you were talking there, like Lorca? We don't have one of those. And how can we actually better promote the sector, to brand it, the companies that are here, and the great careers that are available as well. So they were the kind of challenges that were set by industry day one. And there was a call for some sort of an industry representative body to address these challenges then. And that's where the cluster developed out of. So we got funding from national government to get it set up and running. That project started in November 2018, did a number of stakeholder engagement workshops all around the country, got huge buy-in, over 250 people attended those. And that kind of set out our stall as well of the feedback from industry in those workshops led into what the objectives and cluster initiatives should be. So where we are, I suppose if we're looking at it in general, at a high level, who are our members? We've over 110 member organisations, about 90 of those would be from industry. The cybersecurity cluster in Ireland is actually quite heavy with regards to FDI focus. There's a number of cybersecurity companies, vendors that are here, a lot of the logos you might know. They could have everything from, engineering, tech support. Some are doing R&D. Some are more the shared services side, finances, inside sales, and so on. And then there's a number of companies across all different sectors that have their security operation centres based in Cork or the rest of Ireland for their international security operations as well. A number of those companies also set up in Ireland through acquiring Indigenous SMEs. We have mapped out, I'd say, about 60 or so Indigenous cybersecurity companies right across the board, from IT infrastructure, hardware, network management, to identity access management, managed security service providers, regulatory and compliance. And that's a growing sector. And there's a huge opportunity there really for the Indigenous companies to develop, to scale, to go international, and to benefit from the multinational sector that's quite strong there at the moment. If we look at the Cyber Ireland activities, so what do we actually do? Our bread and butter is the kind of the building the community piece. So that's running networking events. We've regional chapters set up around the country. We've special interest groups around threat intel or operational technology security. And we run a conference, or planning to run a conference in October as well, as part of the Cybersecurity Month in Ireland. That allows us then to do all of the other good stuff around looking at the talent shortage, addressing the collaborative R&D issues, and supporting startups and SMEs. Around cybersecurity talent, I suppose we know anecdotally there's a cybersecurity skills shortage in Ireland, but there was no good data actually available around this. So last year we ran a first survey of our members, and we're launching that actually on Thursday, which actually has identified quite a severe cybersecurity skills shortage for our members. The good news about this is there's already a lot of initiatives up and running to address these skills shortages and skills gaps, but we need to have that good data available so that we make sure that the higher education institutes and the training providers are actually addressing effectively the skills needs of industry there as well. Really nice project as well that I might talk about. And that's a collaboration between 5 higher education institutes that are coming together to address the cybersecurity skills shortage that was facilitated through the cluster as well. We have groups as well. I know, Ciara, you were talking about the Glasgow Women's Hacking Group. We have a group there, Cyber Women Ireland, which is looking at supporting women in cybersecurity roles, and are currently conducting a diversity survey as well, looking at diversity and inclusion challenges. Around collaborative research and development, our big one there is to support a national cybersecurity research centre in Ireland. We don't have any national research centres, so research is quite fragmented across the country, across different research centres, universities, and institutes as well. So we're trying to bring that together to map what's going on in academia, what's going on in industry, identify particular funding streams at a national level and a European level, and to bring industry and academia closer together to actually understand what's happening in each of them and where it's relevant for them as well. And then that all feeds into, I suppose, supporting startups and Indigenous SMEs to scale, to innovate, and to go global as well. This is the Cyber Skills Project, which is a really nice one that got government funding, about 8 million just before Christmas. And it's actually looking at putting the courses, cybersecurity courses from across 5 different higher education institutes all online, so that somebody from industry could actually take modules from across different universities and create their own kind of micro credentials and courses to upskill while on the job. So I think that's a really nice example of kind of an innovative collaborative approach to addressing the cybersecurity skills shortage in Ireland. Another one, I think, we're looking at why, get involved in a cluster. And there's a number of cybersecurity challenges internationally that are impacting national cybersecurity clusters as well, whether it's the impact of cybercrime and the increasing attacks and threats that we're seeing, the impact of digital transformation and COVID-19 on companies, whether that's international skills shortage, or whether it's even what's happening in Europe. Europe is very much moving towards strategic autonomy when it comes to cybersecurity, wants to invest more in European indigenous cybersecurity technologies and rely less on US and Asian technologies. And if you look actually at the UK has the biggest output of cybersecurity graduates and cybersecurity postgraduate courses in Europe before it left. So that's a huge gap then for Europe, because it doesn't have the same amount of talent that's coming out, especially that high level technical talent. So that's going to be a huge challenge for Europe now that the UK has left there as well. And I think we can only address these kind of challenges from a collaborative approach by bringing together all the organizations and the key stakeholders across our regions to address these at a national, and then working together to work on it at an international level as well. So that's everything from me, Ciara. Thanks.
Thanks. So yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, now more than ever, we really need to make sure that we are working collaboratively, and I'm forgetting about the politicals of it, but just trying to make sure that we can all work closely together. I thought that was really really interesting. Owen, I know I probably haven't seen you cover that before, and because I probably work a bit more closely to the UK cyber clusters than you and I would, but that's really interesting to see what's going on in Ireland. Lots of exciting projects happening there. Definitely going to steal one or two ideas as well, which is, as part of sharing knowledge and insights. I particularly like the slide you had where you were breaking down the strengths, the different types of SMEs, the different focus, because that's something we're working at in Scotland, really understanding, within that umbrella cybersecurity, what areas can we really call out as being something that we're strong on and specialising in Scotland. So that's something we've just recently kicked off. So we'll be doing that throughout 2021. No, that's great. Thanks, Owen. So we're going to kick off the panel now, but we will give Richard, I know you haven't heard from Richard, we will give Richard a chance to introduce himself and tell us a bit about Synham as part of that. So David, I'll hand over to you if that's okay.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks, Ciara, and thanks, Phil, and thanks, Owen, for that. As Ciara says, I'd like to welcome Richard to the discussion, and if we could perhaps give you the opportunity to give a little bit of background and introduce yourself, and then we can move on to some questions beyond that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute. It's really great to be involved and to hear the message that's been consistent across all the presentations so far about the need to collaborate, and that's very much at the heart, I think, of what all clusters are about, is how do we promote knowledge exchange and collaborate for the greater good. So a bit of background to me. So I'm one of the directors of Cyber Cheltenham, or Synham as we call ourselves, and we're the cluster for the Cheltenham and Gloucestershire region. So that's effectively north of Bristol, south of Birmingham, to the east of Wales, and to the west of sort of Oxford and that area. And for those of you that don't know, obviously right in the heart of Cheltenham is the National Cybersecurity Centre and GCHQ, which is why there is a very large, or one of the reasons why there's a very large concentration of cyber and cyber tech companies based there that we represent. And what we're focusing on at the moment, very much similar challenges to what we've heard from the other clusters, about sort of driving that ecosystem and economic growth within the sector, but trying to address some of those endemic issues we've got in the industry, such as the cyber skills gap as well. And it'll probably come up in the panel discussion, but one of the things we're working on, with Ciara and Phil and other clusters from across the UK, is how we can join up and share knowledge across the different cluster communities, so that UK PLC as a whole is more secure and driving that foreign inward investment. And so that's very very brief overview of what we're doing in Cheltenham. So back over to you, David.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up to the panel. I have a question in relation to stakeholders and who, from the basis of the cluster, who are the stakeholders that you feel you're working to, and have you any examples of how you've added value for those stakeholders? Perhaps if I could ask Phil first on that one.
Well, thanks, David. And yeah, so what I realized, because I'm not a cybersecurity professional, I came into this as I think my skill set is more in organizing, corralling people together, rather than being a cybersecurity professional. I came to realize what a complicated market cybersecurity is. We have cybersecurity organizations that deliver services, and they can be very different from a part of another organization or an organization that solely does cybersecurity. Or you can have organizations which teach and learn, support that. You can have organizations which have cybersecurity as part of their manufacturing organization, for example. So the Nissan, which is a big car manufacturer in the northeast of England, its cybersecurity European center is within that factory. So that's really interesting. And then you have all the professional services, people like lawyers and accountants who support this market. So it's very complicated. And what we've tended to do is focus on the learning sector and the delivery sector predominantly. And I think we've provided some value in giving recognition to that, certainly engagement with DCMS, engagement with the National Cybersecurity Centre, which just didn't exist before, and getting them to start to think about themselves as a cohesive unit.
Great, thank you. Owen, can I ask you that same question?
Yeah, David. So I suppose we look at it kind of, Ciara mentioned as well, that triple helix model of looking at the cluster. So you have industry at the lead, made up of, I suppose for us, it's cybersecurity vendors, companies that might have their security operation centers in Ireland, but also some large end users as well of cybersecurity products and services, from financial services right through to healthcare and critical national infrastructure as well. And then the different organization size, so from micro enterprises and startups to indigenous SMEs right up to large companies and multinationals. They're the core focus of the cluster, because if you don't have the companies there, you can't create or you can't support a cluster. And that's important, that the cluster needs to be there in the first instance before we actually put public and private funding towards it and supporting the different initiatives. Then academia obviously plays a very key role in regards to the supply of talent and around research and innovation as well. So we have 11 higher education institutes that are members of the cluster as well as a number of research centres in those. And then government plays a very important supporting role, whether it's through actually facilitating the cluster, getting the people together, supporting it financially. We had support from the organisation in Ireland that supports foreign direct investment, IDA Ireland. More recently, we've got support from the organisation Enterprise Ireland that supports indigenous SMEs there as well. And then connecting in from a policy perspective as well to national government. So we're connected in with the National Cybersecurity Centre and the Department of Communications, where that's it. And I suppose would represent the Cyber Ireland community inputting into the National Cybersecurity Strategy as well. And really, I suppose the whole benefit of this is we're looking at addressing kind of challenges that no one organization could really do by themselves. It takes someone to bring all of those key kind of stakeholders together to address these big challenges and to pull in the right direction. So whether that's the skills shortage or collaborative R&D or whatever it may be, having a facilitator there to address those. So like, for example, that cyber skills project, which got €8 million in funding, we, I suppose, identified that there was a cybersecurity skills shortage there. We went out to the higher education institutes and said to them, there's a skills shortage here. This is what industry are saying they need. They need smaller, shorter courses with micro-credentials. It needs to be moved online. We need to explore specific skills gaps. And here's the funding that you can do this for. And the 5 academic institutes said, okay, let's go for it, and put in that application with Cyber Ireland as the industry partner. So I think it's delivering those kind of joined up collaborative projects that we can facilitate through the cluster. And I suppose it also has an important part to play in regards to society as well. How does the cluster link in with, whether it's, children that, it's important to attract those into a career in cybersecurity, or even just from information security and what they're doing online, to their parents who are working at home now, to even elderly people, who are obviously using, digital technologies more than ever because of COVID. So I think that's important as well, that aspect. How do we connect in with society as well?
I think, sorry to come in there, I think it's a really, really important point, isn't it? Particularly with COVID and the impacts that has had on employment and perhaps in other industries, that addressing that cyber skills gap whilst also trying to address the sort of post-COVID impact. And it feels like there's a solution there in, being able to skill people up who have perhaps worked in other industries that have been impacted to help address the skills agenda. And it's fantastic to hear. I mean, £8 million funding for a programme around that's, going to have a real difference. And definitely be good to chat afterwards from what we could learn from how you put that bid together. Really good to do.
Good, thank you. Kira, I don't know, do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, absolutely, like to, yeah. So, I mean, I think Owen gave a very comprehensive answer, so there's not too much I can add, but I do think it's worth emphasising that a lot of people seem to have this perception that the cluster focuses particularly at cybersecurity companies, and although that is a key part of it, our focus, and that's who we're trying to support, as Owen already mentioned, it's really important that we work with the end user community, the companies that have those large specialist teams or stocks, because they're the ones that can tell us what the market needs are, what the challenges are still trying to face, so that we're making sure that, when we're working with the innovation companies, that they are developing market needed, products and services. So you need to have those two coins of the conversation to make sure you're getting that insight and that intelligence together. And also just quickly touch on skills as well. So we do focus on skills within the cyber cluster in Ireland, but there's also a lot of other organisations that are really pushing ahead with that. So we support them. I'm on the working group for Skills Development Scotland, who have been running a lot of programmes over the last couple of years on skills. And there's been a real push to make sure it is as inclusive as possible. So there's been some pilots around getting veterans, moving into career in cybersecurity, long-term unemployed, and that would include women who might have been out of the workforce for many years, and groups of society with neurodiverse conditions as well. So I agree with everything Owen said. We need to make sure we're helping the skills agenda, and we're making sure this is a really inclusive sector, that people don't have this perception that that it's too technical and it's only for real geeky people, because that is not the case at all. There's many different roles within cybersecurity, and it's something that anyone can access at any time in their career, regardless of their gender, their background, or conditions or challenges they may have to live with. So it's certainly that's a real focus in Scotland, and that's driven mainly through the Scottish government and working with organisations like Skills Development Scotland.
Can I just say that there are many more people working outside of the cybersecurity sector in cybersecurity. Most of the people who are working are working in firms just doing their day-to-day job. Quite often, though, they're not full-time equivalents. They're just point one of a person here and point two of a person. And so we need to consider that in its wider remit. And also, I think that we haven't mentioned law enforcement here. There's a significant role to be played by the police in this, and there's a lot of involvement going across the clusters, I think, in that.
Well, I think that's also an interesting area, because that might be an area where some of the focus might vary a little bit among clusters, because I don't think we're all going to exactly match, in where we do focus. So in Scotland, and I know this is a question actually on the chat. I don't know, David, are you picking us up about cybercrime, which I'm sure we'll come to later. But in Scotland, we've got the Scottish Business Resilience Centre, and they've been established for around a decade. So they're well established. In fact, they're much larger organisation than the cyber cluster. So they would have a really strong and close connection with Police Scotland, and with a lot of the programmes run to Police Scotland. While the cluster, we would, in order not to duplicate and overlap, we would not tend to get that involved in that side of things. So again, each of us are going to have slightly different setups and frameworks in terms of who we work with and how that works. So it's interesting to understand that, to understand the similarities, but there are differences between clusters as well.
I think that's one of the things in the operating framework for clusters that we're developing sort of collaboratively across, is recognising that there's those regional differences. The cyber resilience centres across the UK, I think they were based on the model that's been successful in Scotland and are being rolled out in sort of 10 different areas. And from a sign-on perspective, we are sort of working closely with them on the Southwest CRC and their advisory group. But we're very much coming at it from, well, how can we, use that as an opportunity to actually drive innovation to meet market needs. So if there's particular issues of cybercrime that are prevalent in the region, well, actually, if we feed that into our community of cyber companies, they can perhaps develop innovative solutions and rapidly get them out to market to address that need.
Makes sense.
I think that's a really important point as well, Ciara, because I don't know for you guys, but when we set up Cyber Ireland back in May of 2019, there was already a number of organisations playing in cybersecurity space with regards to, talent and skills initiatives. There was one that came out from government aiming to train up 5,000 professionals in cybersecurity skills. There's research organisations there as well. You have government agencies that support FDI or Indigenous SMEs. So it's finding where does the cluster sit within all those existing organisations to ensure that we're not duplicating what's already there, and I suppose facilitating then the connections between the different organisations as well. I thought that was an interesting point as well, Phil, that you were saying, it's not just the cybersecurity companies, it's outside of that. We kind of did an estimation of the number of people working in cybersecurity industry in Ireland, and it's about 7,000. But we looked at how many people actually have cybersecurity certifications and qualifications. That was 30,000 people. So it's way bigger than the actual industry itself, if you extrapolate it out. And then to your point as well, Richard, you were looking at, I think, conversion courses, and there's been, I suppose, COVID has had a disastrous impact on a lot of people. A lot of them have lost their jobs, they're still out of work. There's an opportunity there, I suppose, if there is a skills shortage in cybersecurity, to retrain people, but to ensure as well that they're the right type of people with the right competencies, and even looking at aptitude testing, maybe, to see are they suitable to a role in cybersecurity as well. And there's a number of kind of conversion courses that have been set up in Ireland as well. But around the whole area of skills, we'd very much be looking to the UK as a leader in cybersecurity skills. You're investing hugely in cybersecurity talent, and under the national strategy as well. That research piece that we did that we're launching next week was very much looking at the UK report that was done, and a lot of our programs as well, whether it's higher education programs or even supporting kids getting into cybersecurity. We're looking to the UK to see what's being done, because it's really fantastic, some of the initiatives that the UK I suppose is being led by government there in the NCSC.
Yeah, it's been something that we've actually been looking, because of where we're based, to be able to get involved in and help drive that sort of Cyber First program and the Cyber Schools Hub initiative. And just talking from a personal perspective, because I was involved in going into some of the schools, it's fantastic, the sort of feedback and the response you get, as you're sort of engaging with the kids and getting them excited about the industry. It's it really does, and that's started to have an impact where we're seeing increased take up in computer science and other related STEM subjects. And no, we won't see the impact of that on the industry probably for a few more years as they go through the education system. And so what we're now focusing on, in addition to the school stuff, is actually the 18 to 24-year-old age group, and how we can encourage more companies to take apprenticeships and try and address some of the barriers that are perceived around doing that.
I think it'll be interesting when you say there about apprenticeships, Richard. It'll be interesting to see how that opens up the opportunity for perhaps more specialisms within cybersecurity. So looking at particular industrial sectors who will bring through employees who will understand both sides of it, in the same way that we've got that challenge around the conflict between engineering and cyber specialists with our industrial control systems. I think it'll be interesting to see whether things like the apprenticeships will help to address that to some extent.
It's a really good point, actually, because yes, there is a danger that we create a lot of generic cyber skills, but without that deep domain knowledge that's required to make them effective in different industries. So it's definitely a good question. I don't profess to have the answer, but I think it's something we, well, maybe Phil does actually in the.
Yeah, I think I don't know where this is happening, but there's the new T skills that are coming along, which are kind of reverse apprenticeships. So rather than I think apprentices spend some time at college and some time in industry, it's flicked around, and so these people are employed actually in the specific industries and go to college in order to get their T skill level. As well, it's a technical qualification. So I think we'll see this introduction over the next year or so, and that could be a really exciting opportunity to close the gap on cybersecurity specific to industry, such as chemical processing, offshore renewables, advanced manufacturing, all the things that have specific requirements for cybersecurity.
Great, good, thank you. So we also have a question from Hugo, who I believe is on from Mexico, and welcome, Hugo. And Hugo is asking, what is the perspective of smart cities cybersecurity in Scotland and in Ireland? So perhaps if I could come to you first, Owen, on that one, please.
There's a couple of smart cities projects and initiatives in Ireland. We have one here in Cork. It's the Smart Gateway Initiative, which is run by the local council here, to engage with industry and academia around smart cities. There's some large organizations like IBM who are very much playing in this space as well. We actually haven't engaged much on the security aspect around smart cities initiatives. So it's something that, you know, maybe that we should be looking at as well.
Kira, what are your points on that insofar as the Scottish perspective on that? Because I know that Glasgow's really pushing ahead with the development for a lot of different smart city technologies.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I was going to say that. So if you're trying to kind of, I guess, immerse yourself in what's happening in Scotland, you're certainly looking at some of the Glasgow Council and Glasgow websites. They're really pushing the bar when it comes to Scotland. But on the security side, I would also look at the Census website. So that's CENSIS. Census are an innovation centre focused on cybersecurity and IoT, and they're actually running a number of IoT secure by design programs at the moment. And they had a innovation challenge last year. So we had 4 organizations come through. They had many more apply, but 4 organizations come through with these secure IoT products and solutions. So there's a lot happening on the secure IoT side of things, which it won't all be directly related to smart cities, but you would imagine some of them would certainly tie into that. So I would, take a look at what's happening in Glasgow and take a look at Census. They probably have links to what's happening in Glasgow as well. And Hugo, if you can't find any of this too easily, reach out to myself or David. We're more than happy to connect you into that as well.
I guess one of the areas from the smart city perspective is the rollout of 5G and the potential increase in connectivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Scotland is doing quite a lot in 5G. I'm sure all the areas are as well. So Scottish 5G Centre is a good place to start there. But there's actually a number of 5G innovation hubs that are going to be set up over the next year or two. It's now going out to procurement. So we're going to see a real growth in 5G in innovation happening in Scotland. And as you say, a lot of that will be tied back to IoT and to smart cities as well, because they just go hand in hand in terms of the use cases and applications of IT when 5G comes along in earnest.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Kira. Phil, are you seeing anything around smart cities happening down in the north? Sorry,
Yeah,
that sounds a bit of a strange expression, down in the north, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But we're used to it. We're sort of geographically remote. But yes, we are. Newcastle particularly, I think, is big on IoT and does 5G around Sunderland, etc. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. But that's an interesting point, really, though, David, is that we always need to think of cybersecurity first in all of these technologies that we're doing. We really need to design security in rather than think of it as an afterthought later. And so, I mean, we've got a couple of other interesting initiatives in the region. We've got the National Innovation Centre for Data. So there's a big opportunity, big correlation between data and cybersecurity, and also the National Innovation Centre for Aging and Vitality. So again, none of us are getting any younger, and I think these present other interesting aspects of cybersecurity that we need to think about. But let's get it in at the start rather than think of it as an afterthought.
Yeah, no, can I just jump back in? Sorry, I think that's a really good point, Phil. And that's something we are trying to do. If there was many more of us, we'd be doing it across every sector we can. So we're trying to do it, build it up as we can. But I completely agree, especially for any emerging sectors, getting in early to have those conversations on 5G. On IoT, I think security, didn't come in early enough, and there's a bit of catch up. But it's good to see there's a real focus on security and IoT now. But I do think that's the way the clusters can help, because you can help to be the interface and that connection from those other sectors and other technical areas, technology areas, and for help to bring the cyber community to the table there as well. So yeah, no, great, good point.
But all sectors are emerging in effect now, aren't they? I mean, even things like traditional manufacturing, for example, a lot of that's being done by drawings are being pushed remotely, and investment in CNC machines is being done remotely. And so we're seeing a lot of new data opportunities and new cybersecurity opportunities and threats.
No, I totally agree. And it's never too late. Like, I'm not saying we're too late in the IoT. It's just, it would have been better if it started like a decade earlier. But as you say, we will bring cybersecurity to the table as soon as we can. But you're right, we've started to work with a national manufacturing industry. I can't remember, NMIS they're called. I can never remember what the acronym stands for. But they're really starting to invest in data science and cybersecurity in a big way, because suddenly everything's gone online, so digital becomes so relevant to them in a way it just never would have been 10 years ago. So you're right, it's even into existing sectors, the digital element is going to be evolving and emerging more and more.
Yes, yeah, I know they're talking about starting to plan for cableless factories, so that everything is going to be connectivity as opposed to cabling an industrial factory, which is just a seismic shift from where we are just now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the vulnerabilities that potentially brings to the whole manufacturing process. So I'd like to just ask the panel what you feel is the biggest challenge that you currently face in developing the clusters. And if I could go to Richard, please.
Yes, it's a really, really good question. I mean, we've been very, very fortunate, I guess, in Cheltenham. So we've been formed about 3.5 years ago, with the level of engagement from the ecosystems, the businesses within the region, a number of whom sponsor the work that we do. But I would say our biggest challenge is around funding. There's a real opportunity to do more and more of this collaboration and join up and to really support the growth of the ecosystem. But until the 12 months ago, we were all operating voluntarily and doing it in our spare time. We've, as I say, through generous sponsorship, we've been able to bring on somebody part-time, but then we're looking at what our plans are for this year. And the scope to do so much more, but with that we need funding and resource to be able to deliver it on it all. So I think that's our biggest challenge. We're working through it. We're getting support and engagement now from DCMS and central government, which is very exciting, but that still is a challenge.
Thanks, Richard. Kira, what do you feel the biggest challenge for the cluster is?
Yeah, I do. But I just think there's so much we could do if we had many, many more of us, and I'm saying that, with the luxury of having me, more or less full time, and David, you're involved as well. So between the two of us, we're about 1.5 person, I guess, capacity, which is a lot more than, a lot of cluster organizations. I know Phil will echo this when we go to Phil. So I'm saying that with that, amount of resources involved, but there's so much more we could be doing and we'd love to do. If we had, more and more resources and more funding, and also it's that long-term funding as well. The funding we are getting, which is from Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise, isn't going to remain there indefinitely. We are going to have to find a more sustainable industry-led framework at some point as well. So that's going to be a challenge that's kind of looming at us at some point. Hopefully that won't be the near future, but at some point we will have to address that. So I think, just there's a lot more we can do if giving enough bodies. I think one of the challenges, and sorry, I'll let others speak in a second, is a lot of what we do, it's very hard to track metrics. It's very hard to really show that hard evidence, because we're making connections all the time. We're profiling, we're speaking, public speaking. A lot of what we're doing is because it's that intangible bit. it's very hard to track that metric, it's track the success, and therefore on the back of that going, we've achieved this, therefore we'd like this amount of funding to continue the work. And that's, I think, is one of the challenges we have, is just how can we prove we are making a difference. I've lots of verbal or even email feedback with people of thanking me for this, that, and the other. Is that enough to be able to go and say we want X amount of money to kind of expand this and go it further? That is for me one of the challenges.
And I guess it's difficult to demonstrate what you've prevented, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Bill, can I ask you that question as well, please, around the clusters?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point here. But for the northeast of England, I think there's two specific issues. One is that we're not noted for cybersecurity as a region, so I think we've got that uphill battle to climb first of all. And I think we're making good inroads into that. So events like this help, and people will think about the northeast in ways that they'd never thought about before. But on the back of that, though, we have kind of a lot of businesses who think that their competitor is next door, is within the region, rather than, and don't have that national or even global perspective on where the business of future cybersecurity business is going to go. But we're still very inward looking as a region, and we need to do that work. So that's kind of my focus, I think, in my 1 day a week.
Thanks. Owen.
Yeah, they're all really good points. Sorry, David, for cutting across you. There's probably a bit of a lag on my side here. We're in the middle of a storm here in the south of Ireland, so the rain is lashing against the window outside. I'd agree with all of them. Like Richard, I think every cluster I talk to, especially in the early stages of it, funding is always an issue. And if you were to talk to me 6 months ago, 9 months ago, I would have said funding was a big challenge for us as well, because we were coming to the end of our 2-year period of funding from national government, and we had to move to a more sustainable financing method where we were bringing in private funding as well. And we launched a membership model in June of last year, which was in the middle of the pandemic. We had no idea whether companies would actually sign up and value what we were doing. And talking to a lot of companies, multinationals in particular, would have said, yeah, I could have put this on a credit card or expensed it before and got it through. Now everything's being scrutinized by finance. So that was a big challenge for us last year, really, to see would we still be around this year. And I suppose the way we have it set up is that the large companies and multinationals are the ones really that are subsidizing the small guys and the micro enterprises and startups to actually participate and benefit from it. So I'm glad to say that we've over 100 members that have signed up and are paying now. So we have that industry revenue stream, but I think that's one that we lack in Ireland as well. We don't have a national cluster policy, and so we don't have a sustainable kind of funding stream there to support clusters, but also to provide the support in regards to the knowledge of what is a cluster, how do they run, the management of them, education, all that piece as well, which I know across other European regions, they actually have an economic development organization that supports the cluster in training and how it's run, as well as the funding. And if you look at the funding for other clusters, I know across Europe, a lot of them take a long-term approach where you're actually looking at 5 years of funding that's given to these clusters, which means that you can really address the types of challenges that we're looking at. Because as you said, Ciara, what we're doing is very hard to put metrics around. You're not going to have a short-term win in a year or 2 years with any of the kind of initiatives that we're looking at. They're very hard to kind of track. We're not looking, certainly from our point of view, I would never say that we're looking to create X amount of jobs or have X amount of innovation projects, which is leading to certain amount of sales, because that's very difficult to track to say, was that the cluster, or was that because there's a demand internationally for products or something that the company did themselves? So, I suppose it's trying to match those funding sources between short-term, maybe from industry, long-term from government, to the actual initiatives that we are running in each of our clusters as well is really important. And I think trying to convey that message of what's the value of what we're delivering for the members and the stakeholders, and getting away from this idea that like we're just industry associations, that we're networking groups, because it's really much more. It's around being innovation clusters and supporting startups and SMEs to go on to that next level so that they can compete internationally. And as you said, Phil, get away from that idea of just looking towards their competitors within the region and looking internationally as well.
Thanks, Owen. Thank you. So I guess that kind of takes me on to the next question that I have, which is, do you see that at the moment the clusters are operating on a regional basis? Yes, there's talk about looking at it nationally. Do you see that there will be a standardization across internationally for the clusters insofar as how they address the issues that nationally they're facing? Do you see like an international standard arising around how we operate the clusters and how they address cybercrime? And maybe if I could put that to Richard.
Yeah, thanks. I think sort of looking at the national picture, that there is a desire to have a. I'm sort of loath to use the word a sort of standard approach, because it's really important that we have that regional focus and can prioritise in line with what's right for our region. But equally, I think there is a common set of operating principles that as clusters we can all get behind and follow, and that's been the kind of key to the work that we've been doing. When I say we, there's a sort of subset of about 8 or so of the clusters across the UK that have been collaborating to pull together a set of operating principles, outcomes and objectives for clusters. And the idea of where we want to take this is to put in place a body for the UK that it's effectively a single body that represents the cluster community that DCMS can then fund, and we can then use that body to then support the work of the clusters. And we can recognise clusters as official clusters that operate in line with those principles and objectives. And then that body can act as a single voice, engage with the National Cybersecurity Centre, the Cabinet Office in terms of the National Cyber Strategy, DCMS, and we can actually start to have a greater impact on a national level. And another key aspect of that approach, I guess, is not just to be able to support the clusters and have a common set of operating principles, but also be able to identify those opportunities for collaboration across the UK and across the different clusters, and so that we are then seen internationally as a sort of leading light in how we work together. So hopefully that kind of answers the question to the point.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Owen, how do you see it from a slightly different perspective insofar as still being in Europe and seeing that potential of collaboration across Europe, which may not be so easy now for the UK to be involved in? How do you see that? Do you see that you'll align perhaps more with the European or with the UK? You mentioned earlier that you certainly were watching what was happening within the UK.
It was bound to happen at some stage. I was on mute. So I think Richard's point is really important, that we have to look at it from a regional point of view firstly, before you can go national and international. I suppose the reason why Cyber Ireland is national is because Ireland, we think, is small enough to have a national cluster in comparison maybe to the UK, where there's longer travel distances and maybe you actually have larger concentrations of industry as well. But when we looked at it, there was a strong concentration of cybersecurity companies and SOCs in Cork in the south. There was a number of kind of companies up in the west with cybersecurity operations. And then Dublin obviously is quite big in regards to the end users and number of startups and indigenous SMEs there as well. And then I think connecting in internationally is really important. Like Ciara mentioned, the global EPIC network, which there's over, I think, 30 cybersecurity clusters from all around the world that are involved in that. And that's about that kind of sharing of best practices, what's happening in each of our regions locally that we can share and learn from each other. And then you can even look outside of cybersecurity and say, what are the common elements or criteria for clusters in general, cluster organizations, and ensuring that we're living up to a kind of a good standard of what is a cluster and maybe what isn't a cluster. I suppose that comes in maybe under European programs like the European Secretariat for Cluster Analysis that you have that silver award for. We don't yet have a cluster award there for that cluster management piece, but I think that is important as well. And then looking towards, I suppose, Ireland and UK collaboration in Europe, I think we're always going to have a very close relationship between Ireland and the UK, and that just goes back to our history and our relationships there. We're very close to each other, both I think socially and geographically. We very much look over to the UK as leaders in cybersecurity globally, and I suppose that would be the benchmark for where Ireland wants to go to as well. And even if you look at it, one of our key recommendations to government actually is supporting north-south research and development between Ireland and Northern Ireland through an all-island research centre. So there's 6 of these all-island research centres going to be funded by Science Foundation Ireland, National Science Funder in Ireland, and also in Northern Ireland as well, funded by the UK government. And we've made a submission that one of these should be in cybersecurity to link Queen's University in Belfast with research that's happening in the south there. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities for collaboration between Ireland and the UK even after Brexit.
We might even have a bridge over there sometime as well, which would be fabulous if our chance to say, but let's not get into that today.
Was it not a tunnel that they're talking about now?
Oh, could be, you know. Anyway, moving on swiftly.
Yes. So I have another question here that's come in from Sanjay. And it's asking about what is the challenge in terms of cybercrime in your respective regions, please? Any particular sector prone to more cybercrime? And where are these threats coming from, and what's the nature of the threats? So I guess 3 questions in there. Maybe could I go to Phil on that one, please?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to pick that. Just before I do, though, can I just go back to that previous question? I think that there's a growing international issue around cybersecurity. There are some definite rogue states. There's issues around the predominance of American companies in providing solutions. So I think a global effort is required to international cooperation is much more required in order to get these problems fixed. As for crime, my understanding is working with the Northeast Business Resilience Centre, equivalent to the Scottish Resilience Centre, is that a lot of not new crime has been developed, but a lot of switch from old scams into new online scams as people have become much more requiring to work online. And that's been very much across the board, people being very opportunistic, but nothing particularly new, but people picking up on COVID as an opportunity to engage people in conversations, either online or on the telephone, and you need to pay for this, you need to pay for that, if you're going to go back to work, you need a new certificate, etc. So what we've seen in this period has been opportunistic movement from existing crime to just new badges rather than new innovation at this stage. I'm sure that'll come though.
Kira?
Yeah, I mean, I think most crime is ignores borders, you know, so most of what we're all seeing is going to be similar. Of course, if there's particular sectors that the country is strong on, then you're going to see more in that particular sector. So, for example, in Scotland, you know, we've got a big oil and gas sector, so you know that would be an area we'd be, you know, very aware of, you know, any crimes, particularly focusing that sector. Similarly, financial services, we've got a big sector there. So we'll see more stories, we'll see more stories around that, just because there are areas that we've got a lot of industry and a lot of expertise on, and then they're obviously, you know, having the experts protect those areas as well. But I think most crime ignores boundaries, and we're all going to see quite similar attacks and attack types. And you know, we've all seen the impact from COVID. I think there's some statistics saying 20% of attacks last year were COVID related. So I think that's going to be globally. I don't think there's going to be anything unique in Scotland, you know, to attract any specific types of attack. But I do think, you know, with particular sectors that are strong, and they're the ones that, you know, would be most, we'd see most of, and we'd work closely with to try and help that protection where we can.
Thank you. Richard and Owen, would you have anything else to add on that, or is it the case that, yeah, we are just seeing it's very much the same kind of across the regions?
Yeah, I think so. I think we are absolutely seeing that same pattern and COVID related. Absolutely. I was on the Southwest Cyber Resilience Centre board last week, where they were sort of agreeing priorities to focus on for the region, and actually tourism and leisure, which has obviously been massively impacted by COVID anyway, is seen as an area. I don't know if it's got a specific focus for crime, but actually the resilience in that particular industry isn't as high as other areas. So that's certainly going to be a focus. I think also there's the G7 summit in Cornwall later in the year as well. So that's obviously got a driver there. And the other area where there's potential for more crime is things that you perhaps wouldn't necessarily associate with cyber. So things like agriculture and food supply chain security. There's definitely a concern around that. And as more data, more of it becomes digitized, and so data around tracking livestock, for example, as that becomes digital and goes online, there's more of a risk from data breaches and cyber crime to industries like that traditionally you wouldn't really have considered as having a cyber kind of impact.
I'd agree very much with Phil. What we're seeing in Ireland as well is not necessarily that the attacks are getting more innovative, but that I suppose they're changing with regards to using COVID-19 as a way to target employees or citizens or companies. From an economic point of view, cybercrime is really important to Ireland because it's a big challenge. If you look at Ireland's kind of brand as an international location for FDI, we have a lot of the big tech companies here in Ireland, a lot of the data centers as well for Europe. Supposedly a third of EU's data is hosted in Ireland as well. So from a branding point of view, it's really important that Ireland is seen to be a safe and secure place to do business to attract that FDI as well. If you look at the actual cybercrime stats, targeting Irish companies, we've seen that cybercrime is actually double the global average, which is very worrying for Irish companies. And that the actual high cost cyber incidents are higher in Ireland than the global average as well. So that's really worrying. I suppose it's obviously impacting the digitally intensive sectors, which make up a huge proportion of Ireland's economy as well. When we look at, I suppose, the digitally intensive sectors, Ireland's a front runner in Europe when it comes to digital transformation and as well as digital adoption by SMEs. But we're very much a laggard when it comes to cybersecurity investment by companies and national government. So that we're actually up there with the top ones when it comes to digital readiness, but we're quite further down the line when it comes to cybersecurity benchmarking. And that's something that needs to be addressed at a national level through further investment by government and making it a national priority, really.
So can I just come in and say that I think cybercrime is really underreported, and that's a significant problem for the industry. I mean, you think you yourselves probably had 3 or 4 spoof mails today trying to extract money from you. It's a very prevalent thing, and none of this gets reported. So we're actually seeing as a tip of a very large iceberg, I think.
I agree. I think you're right, Phil. Great, thank you. I would like to ask one quick question around the panel, please. In one line, what does a cluster mean to you? And if I could go to Kira first, please.
I have a feeling I was supposed to prepare for this, which I haven't managed to at all. In one line, I just think, clusters are all about building community across the cyber ecosystem for the benefit of the local economy and hopefully the wider global economy as well. That's a very large answer and probably doesn't even mean anything if I read it back. But anyway, there you go. That's my effort.
Great. Thanks, Kira. Phil.
Yeah, I think all of us are better than one of us.
Perfect. Thank you. Richard.
So yeah, building on that collaboration, and that's at the heart of innovation. Is collaborating and bringing together. Sorry, I'm doing far more than one line, aren't I? But bringing together the different ingredients, so industry, academia, government, and that community to innovate. Sorry, that was a very, very verbose answer.
Great, thank you. I know, and I'm sorry, everyone else has used up all the options now. So.
Yeah, all the good answers are gone, I think.
That's right. Sorry.
No, I think at the end of the day, it's really about the people, and it's about the people on the call here today. It's about building trust between people and supporting communities. I think that's really it when you bring it down to that kind of practical level.
Great, thank you. And I think at that point, I'd like to say we've got no further questions. And I would like to thank you panelists for being on the event, for your insightful comments, and for putting up with me asking you questions. So thank you very much, and I'd like to pass you back to Ciara.
Thanks, Ava. That was brilliant. Yeah, no, I'm just going to quickly wrap up as well. I know everybody's going to be keen, and some of us have more Cyber Scotland Week events that we're about to jump on to, believe it or not. So yeah, similarly like to say thank you to everybody involved today, and David for facilitating the panels. It's never easy, so appreciate you how smooth you made it feel for us all. We're going to post this recording, so if people missed any of it or want to hear anything back, don't worry, we'll send that out afterwards, including the slides. Feel free to get in touch with any of us. We're here to help to get you connected into all of the 4 clusters represented here. So do feel free to reach out and connect in LinkedIn or we'll get back in touch via the email that will come out in the back of the call. I hope you enjoy the rest of Cyber Scotland Week. I hope you find this event useful and insightful. And yes, thank you for everyone for joining today, and to our panelists as well. And on that note, we'll call it to an end. So appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Ciara.
Yes. Bye now, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Ciara. Thanks, David.